Everybody, we are here with Mr. Ralph Avila, and he is one of the people that appears on the new show Mysteries from the Grave, the Titanic, and that's coming Friday, April 8th. Ralph, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, man. Um, yeah. So, question. Okay, I always wanted to know. This is an odd question, but I always wanted to know how people get involved in those shows. You know,
Yeah.
one of the many people interviewed and stuff like that. So you have you're into obviously the Titanic, but how did you end up on this show being interviewed about it?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So for me, basically, I'm a Titanic sort of influencer. It kind of happened as a fluke, but for me personally, I've always been very into the Titanic. It's always been my thing. You know, when I was in elementary school, I would talk about it. Everybody would ignore me because it was just something that was a part of my life. And then in 2020, it was the anniversary of the sinking, which obviously is in April. So I decided to try out TikTok. It was a new thing for me at the time. I made a TikTok featuring one of the survivor stories, and then it blew up all over TikTok. So then I continued making videos. And then before we knew it, we had a huge community of Titanic nerds, right? So the way that I got involved in this documentary was the producers saw my TikTok, they saw my social media presence. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram at titanicguy.com. And then I'm also on YouTube. So they saw me on there. We had a call saying, hey, would you be interested in giving us some of your insight as a Titanic enthusiast, Titanic historian, Titanic influencer? And I said, yeah, sure, let's do that. It's my favorite topic to talk about. So why not just do it on TV?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So okay, what started your fascination with the Titanic in particular?
Yeah. So it's funny because whenever I have live streams with my community and everything, there's always one sort of common factor, and it seems like every single one of us, we're wired the same. Our brains work the same. For some reason, we're just into disasters.
Okay.
There's a certain profile of people that get really hooked onto Titanic. And I think it's people who are into history, who are into disasters. And for me, it's just always something that's been interesting to me. Disasters, forensic analysis of things, of history. And when I was 7 years old, I believe, I was either 7 or 8 years old, I remember watching a documentary. I don't exactly remember which documentary it was. And it was pretty much, they were doing a forensic analysis of a famous ship that sank. They were doing a test, with a model, seeing what would have happened if they had left the watertight doors open. And it was so captivating to me when I was a little kid. I was like, this is really, really cool. I asked my dad what it was. He's like, oh, it's this famous ship that sank. He explained a little bit about it. And I thought it was very interesting. Then coincidentally, that very same year, 1997, a few months later was when James Cameron's 1997 Titanic movie came out. Yeah. So I remember in my little kid brain, I was like, oh, that's a thing that I just saw the documentary about. So I somehow convinced my parents to take me to the movies when I was like 7 years old. And then I watched it multiple times. And I think that sort of solidified the interest, the obsession. And then ever since then, it's just always been part of my life. As a kid, I would go to the library, take out every single book that I could find about the Titanic, read everything. I'd get bored, then I'd take out some more books, and it's just always been something that's been a part of me, right? And so that's why it was very easy to just start talking about it on social media. The difference is that now people tend to listen, which is rather nice.
Well, you have a wider net.
Exactly.
To cast with. I could just picture the librarians going, "Oh, here's that Titanic kid."
Here's the kid. I know.
But well, okay, so like, why? Okay, obviously, I'm into horror, and in particular, love the true crime stuff and all that business,
right?
And of course, Titanic as well. But why are these types of things, these disasters, why are these so morbidly fascinating? Do you think?
You know what? I've thought about that a lot, actually, because that's one of the common questions. Why are you into that? What is interesting about it? And when I reflect on that, I think what really captivates me, when looking at disasters, when looking at these morbid things, it's not the fact that they happened. Obviously, we don't enjoy disasters happening. They're horrible events. But what is interesting to me is just seeing the human nature, how so many people can react in different ways presented with one of these situations. That's why I love learning about the survivor stories, learning about acts of heroism, cowardice. People behaved in so many different ways. And the Titanic is interesting because it was one of those stories where this disaster, it played out in such a way where it was slow enough for all this drama to occur. There were stories of people giving up their spots in lifeboats. There were stories of people leading others to lifeboats, people jumping into the water, some people dressing up as men dressing up as women, for example. So people behaved in so many different ways. And to me, that's incredibly captivating. And then you start to wonder, what would I have done in that situation? Right. So I think a lot of people are drawn to that, just seeing the human aspect of these disasters, because for a lot of us, we know the technical things related to the disaster. We know the timeline, we know how the ship broke up, but I think the human aspect is what really pulls people in there and what keeps them entertained and keeps them, obsessed for so many years.
So in the show, there are a few anecdotes of like weird ominous signs that things were going to go very wrong. But do you have a favorite anecdote of your own?
So the thing with anecdotes is, that these are just anecdotes.
Right.
It's impossible to prove anything, but there's one, I don't know how much truth there is, but it is a popular story within the Titanic community, is that of Jenny the cat. So if anybody is a little bit confused, basically Titanic had its own mascot. It was a cat called Jenny. And this was common for other steamships at the time. I believe that Jenny had been on the Olympic. People had confirmed. There's actually a picture showing a cat. So we assume it's Jenny the cat. Anyway, the story goes that before Titanic set sail from Southampton, a stoker, one of the people stoking the coal into the fire, he saw Jenny and her kittens. They were walking off of the Titanic. They were walking off the Titanic, and it's believed that they survived because the cat knew something. So the stoker, he saw that. He immediately took that as a very bad omen, and he got off the ship and survived. Now, whether I can verify the story, of course I can't verify the story, but that is one of those anecdotes that have been going around the Titanic community.
I don't know why the cat was worried. They have 9 lives. So
exactly. Well, they have the 9 lives because they do stuff like that.
Because they're smart. They're like, yeah, humans, okay. So let's see here. One of the things that I was wondering is, with so many dead people, if you believe in them, there have to be ghosts. So are there any known instances of like the dead from the Titanic haunting survivors or locations?
You know what? It's interesting because it really depends on who you ask, and every survivor, they had their own experience. So it's hard to say whether there were ghosts that came, but the one thing that I will say is that a lot of these survivors, they were plagued by their own trauma. So you could consider that sort of the ghost that kept on haunting them. For example, the gentleman who actually spotted the iceberg, Frederick Fleet, he was really haunted by his own personal ghosts. He suffered from depression, from PTSD, and survivor's guilt. And it wasn't just him. There were many other people that had the same sorts of feelings. So they were haunted by that depression, by those feelings for a lot of them, the majority of their lives. So I would say that those were some of the main ghosts that came out of Titanic and really haunted a lot of people. In terms of actual ghost stories, I'm personally not familiar with it, but I know that a lot of people did suffer, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, obviously. But I was
Yeah.
like, I was like, I've never heard of like a ghost from the Titanic haunting anybody, you
Yeah,
know?
I know.
So,
When you go to the Titanic Museum in Las Vegas, I have a picture, and you take a picture, and then when they print you out the picture, there's actually a ghost of Captain E.J. Smith, and I have the picture. It's pretty funny because you see. Yeah,
it's like one of those little photo ops at the end.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so listen, so as far as when I was watching the show, they were talking about how close they came to not having
Mhm.
the disaster. But I mean, really, how close was it? How close was it to them avoiding the iceberg and them just going on their merry way? Or
It really was incredibly close, and that's one of the other reasons why Titanic, we still talk about it 110 years later, because it was really a perfect storm of events. The conditions were such that it was hard to spot the iceberg. It was a moonless night. The sea was completely still, not a single wave in the ocean that night. And really, a lot of experts say, and a lot of historians think, that if the lookouts had spotted the iceberg just even 10 seconds, 15 seconds earlier, they may have been able to avoid it. Because the problem was that it wasn't a gash that was opened, it was the impact in certain areas. So if you think about, let me actually,
okay,
so if you, this is my submersible model that I have. So it wasn't so much as like a gash that was continuous.
right,
It was impact here, boom, 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 as the ship kind of hit the iceberg. And what would happen, it opened up the plates. So the rivets popped out and it opened up the plates, letting in water. So it wasn't one big gash that ran 300 meters, as you see in some of the older books. It was a series of openings caused by the impact. So really, if they had seen the iceberg 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds earlier, the whole thing could have been avoided, and we probably wouldn't even be speaking about it today. But as history would have it, that was not the case.
well, and there you go.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share about maybe other stories that maybe didn't make the show? Or
Well, I don't exactly know what made the show yet, because it
oh,
premieres.
you haven't seen it?
No, no, no. It premieres on April 8th on.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm very excited to see that. So I actually haven't seen the final cut.
Haha, I
I
have.
know what I talked about, but I'm really excited to see the other guests. I know that there are survivors, descendants of survivors, sorry, and
Mhm.
there's other experts. I'm super excited about that. I will share that one of the stories, I think one of my favorite stories, and the one that actually made me go viral, was that of the drunk baker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story,
No.
and this is a true story. So I don't know if you recall in the movie Titanic, when Jack and Rose are, at the stern of the ship toward the end where they're hanging on there, Rose looks over and she sees a gentleman dressed in white, right?
Yeah.
He's the one that's taking swigs out of his flask. And that person, that actor, represents the real baker on the Titanic. His name was Charles Jugan. And the reason why James Cameron placed him there was because of his actual firsthand accounts. So Charles Jugan, when the iceberg, when the collision occurred, he pretty much started drinking. So he was drinking a lot, lots of whiskey. He tried to help out as much as possible. It's believed that he tossed like 50 deck chairs overboard, for people to cling on to when the time came. He helped women get into the lifeboats. So he was trying to help out as much as possible. And in the process, to cope with everything, he was just getting really, really drunk. Now,
At
as the
least he
ship
was
was
a happy drunk.
yeah, exactly. As the ship was going down, he ended up making his way all the way to the stern. And it was his testimony that probably inspired Jack and Rose being on there in the script, because he testified that it went down rather smoothly and that he stepped off the ship, without barely even getting his hair wet. And since he was so drunk, normally what alcohol does, it's not recommended that you drink, because alcohol actually brings you closer to hypothermia quicker. But it's believed that in his case, because he was so drunk, he was so numb, he didn't feel the shock when he went into that frigid water, right? So a lot of people, they would go into shock and then they'd lose a lot of energy because their bodies are naturally gasping for air. He didn't have that. So he was able to tread in the water. He made his way to this overturned lifeboat, collapsible B. And then he just waited there because the lifeboat was filled with men. And sadly, as men started to die off throughout the night, they would be washed off. And then he finally was able to board collapsible B. So this baker survived drunk and in the water. And his story is 100% a true story.
So really, the key to life and survival is whiskey.
Yeah, that's what everybody said in the TikTok that went viral. I was like, so you're telling me that alcohol can save my life? I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm just telling his story.
Exactly. Well, on that jovial note, we will end this. But thank you so much for taking the time. And I'd like to. I'm interested to know what you think of the show when it comes out.
I'm excited to see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, you guys, this is Rafa Avila, and can you tell everybody where to follow you on social?
Sure. You guys can find me on TikTok. My username is Raf_Avila. Same on Instagram. You can find me. My personal one is Raf_Avila. And then my Titanic one is @Titanic.guy. You can also go to my website, TitanicGuy.com. Very simple. And you can find me on YouTube. You just search Raf Titanic. Just search Titanic Guy and you probably will see me on there.
There you go. Well, everybody, make sure to catch Mysteries from the Grave of the Titanic, Friday, April 8th. And Raf, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
All right. Have a good one.